An excerpt from The First World Order by Saru Alim Tupac El Bey. So these are little pieces of evidence on the ancient history of North America. Of the spoken language of the copper-toned, woolly-haired Moors is no more Native American in Central Amexem. In the 1490 CE, Arabic, Chaldean, and Hebrew. For the rest, referencing of the Cristobal Colon diaries for ascending of the Arabic, Chaldean, and Hebrew-speaking interpreters before the King of Cuba, of the quoting in the book Africa and the Discovery of America by Leo Weiner, W-E-I-N-E-R. Okay, and this is on page 40. By the exterminating and replacing of the 12 to 25 million Moors, Caribs from the 1492 CE through 1500 CE, under the order of the Bishop Bartholomew de las Casas of the island Haiti, misnomer Española, King and Queen of Spain, and Roman Catholic Pope of Rome. For the referencing of the book by Dr. Joseph A. Ben Yakin, Black Man of the Nile, on page 263, and the devastation of the Indies. By the Moors of the progenitors of the English, French, Dutch, and Belgium, titles of the noble family with the coat of arms with the appellations Moor, M-O-O-R, M-O-O-R-E, M-O-R-E, Morrison, Morel, Maurice, Moran, and Moreau, of the referencing in the Ivan Van Sertimo book Golden Age of the Moors, page 235. Under the mandate of the Bey of the Moors Empire, our forefathers for the paying of the tribute into the empire by the English, French, Dutch, Danes, Swedes, United States towards the late 1780 CE, for the referencing in the David McRitchie book, United States and Barbary Powers. Good. So those are just some references to check. Now, why are we talking about Moabites, right? Well, for one, Moab is mentioned in numerous books of the Bible: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Numbers, Judges, Samuel, Genesis, Ruth, Kings, Micah, both Chronicles, right? So these people keep being mentioned and mentioned, right? Also, you'll notice that they're mentioned alongside the Hebrews. Either they're the group of people that are always mentioned is the Hebrews, right? Along with the Hebrews is the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Moabites especially. Reason being is that they shared a space of land for a period of time, where there was a lot of fighting, right, amongst peoples in a fertile crescent.
Yes.
Eventually, like I said, you have people settling in what is like modern-day Lebanon, and people are called the Phoenicians. Phoenicia was established around 1200 BC, right? You look it up, they'll say that a Canaanite religion, and the first capital city was Byblos. That's where you get the word for the Bible, right? Comes from that city. And then the next city was Tyre. In another lecture, I mentioned about Queen Dido of Tyre during the time of Hannibal. It was the Moorish queen. Her name was Dido, who sent Hannibal, or who was in charge, who was queen at that time. Another interesting note: Hiram I, right, becomes the dominant city-state when Hiram I is the king. Okay. So there's certain patterns that keep showing up, right? Hiram Abiff. During the 6th and 7th centuries BC, the Phoenicians built important cities along the Atlantic coast to North Africa, but they found these territories already occupied by a people known as Mori. Okay, so that's an excerpt on this. There's a little bit more to that. It's interesting. by a people known as the Mori, who claim to have originated in Asia Minor, where they had been allied with the Trojans. Their claims seem more than legendary, because the Greeks did indeed know them as the Morusi from the Anatolian Morusia in modern-day coastal Turkey. With the defeat and burning of Troy in 1240 BC, the Mori were forced to find refuge where they could. Hounded by Mycenaean Greeks who opposed by hostile natives in every turn, they fled out of the Mediterranean Sea, finally settling themselves along the shores of the land subsequently named after themselves. So there is Asia, right? Asia Minor somewhere here, and they had to leave and find themselves somewhere here, right? Where Mauritania ended up being established. But they were neither alone nor the first inhabitants of this land. Several indigenous peoples, including the Berbers, Tuaregs, and Gatuli, engaged them in constant strife. For centuries, the Mori were not only forced to defend themselves against these hostile natives, but were also incessantly victimized by bands of roving pirates who plundered the entire coastline of western North Africa. Over time, however, the Mori asserted themselves, brought a modicum of order to this disorderly land, and formed a lasting uneasy peace with the fractious natives, etc. So you can see that these Moabites, right, after being conquered by Assyrians, after establishing Phoenicia, right, Hebrews come in, and the Hebrews war against the Moabites, and so I'll tell you that in the Bible many times, right? And they have to leave. So they go, they spread out back over Africa, and they end up in Northwest Africa, just as the prophet tells us, right? Just a little bit about the Phoenicians too, in order to understand how they became, what the importance of the Phoenicians is, right? Like I said, it says follow me. That's where the word phonetics comes from, because these were the merchants of the sea for a long time, and obviously they're going to influence language all over, right? The so-called ancient world. This is taken from The Lost Treasure of King Juba by Frank Joseph. The evidence of Africans in America before Columbus. When the sudden end of the Bronze Age, about 1200 BC, shattered the old Homeric world order, the Phoenicians expanded as far as the mercantile instinct had taken, which was very far indeed. They inherited the maritime tradition of the Bronze Age predecessors, building exceptionally seaworthy ships, plying their trade throughout the Mediterranean beyond the Pillars of Melchart, today known as the Straits of Gibraltar, into the Atlantic Ocean. Around 600 BC, they were engaged by the Egyptian pharaoh Nekau II to circumnavigate the African continent, right? An accomplishment unrivaled until the voyage of Portugal's Vasco da Gama 2,000 years later. So these guys were like, they were the merchants, they were the businessmen of the time, right? And that was the place if you wanted to get something sent somewhere, you went to the Phoenicians. But what happened was, these Moors, these Phoenicians, they began to hold their trade routes very sacred, right? And they guarded them very closely. So much so that there's stories where they'd be followed by other ships, people from different lands, and they'd crash their ships on the rocks in order so that they couldn't find out where they were going to get certain resources. Just gonna look up. There's a story in here about that. Yeah. Okay. This is same book, page 151. When curious Roman captains sometimes trailed Phoenician merchantmen as they made for the open ocean outside the Straits of Gibraltar, The Punic sailors scuttled their own ships, rather than reveal classified trade routes. During a voyage to the Cassiterides, or the Tin Isles of southern Britain during the early 2nd century BC, a Phoenician captain noticed that he was being followed by a Roman freighter. He deliberately ran his ship on the rocks and escaped with his crew, rather than betray the island's location. Carthage rewarded his action by giving him a new ship and full compensation for the loss of his cargo. Eratosthenes, the father of geography, wrote in the 1st century BC that anyone sailing towards Sardinia or Gibraltar from Italy until Carthage was destroyed by Rome would be killed by Phoenician sailors. Further, it says, to reinforce their domination of the Atlantic, the Phoenicians spread tall tales of enormous sea monsters, savage cannibals, treacherous shoals, ship-sucking whirlpools, vanished fleets, devouring storms, southern waters so hot they literally boiled, floating mountains of jagged ice in the north, and so forth. Such intentionally melodramatic stories were no doubt based on actual experiences that have been greatly exaggerated to awe any potential competitors. As Beatrice Chandler writes, the Phoenicians and Carthaginians had visited the islands of the ocean, going beyond the Pillars of Hercules. But it was the policy of these cunning traders to shroud the true position of their islands in mystery, so that they might reserve for themselves a monopoly of purple dye in the Mediterranean. Centuries later, a Numidian king was their successor. He would adopt the policy of that race, the Carthaginians, to which he was kin, and guard his secret. All of them had in fact obtained from a lichen, Rosella tinctoria, which grows in abundance on the rocky seacoast of the Madeira and Canary Islands, which produces a beautiful purple dye employed to dye wool, silk, and other materials. The Phoenicians, as well as Julius II's Mauritanians, jealously protected from all commercial competitors the location of these overseas sources for Rosella tinctoria, Murex trunculus, and Murex brandaris, as well as other luxury goods. So this stuff that was on the island called Murex trunculus, it could dye your clothes purple, a certain purple. That's why you get royal purple, because if you couldn't get this stuff, then you couldn't have that color. Those were like, forget Jordans, those are like, you know what I mean, the Gucci, like, like that was the stuff, right? You wanted that purple color, right? And you literally had to go to them. You couldn't go anywhere else in the world and get that color, right? And it was off the west coast of Africa, right? The Canary Islands and Madeira off the west coast, where they knew, these Mauritanians on the continent, how to get there. Even though we look on a map and we see it's not far, like back in the day, the Romans had a saying for the Atlantic. They called it the pasture of fools. Like literally, an ocean, right? It's water. But they from whoever tried and whatever happened to them, whatever stories they heard, right? These stories that we told everyone so we could have a monopoly on the market, they called it the pasture of fools. So you can imagine no one was even trying to go out there. No one was even trying to go even to the Canary Islands, right? However, the Phoenicians, right, they had common sense. This was their everyday thing, right? And when they talk about Carthaginians, that was a colony established by Phoenicians, right? Phoenicians here, Carthaginians here. They moved out and they established Carthage, right? Modern day Tunis. So for them, you can imagine going to the Canaries was nothing. That was their everyday. That was their bread. That's how they made their flow, really, right? Coming all the way here now, to the Americas, yeah, it's a journey, and it could be perilous, but they knew their way. They had their routes. There are stories of maps. There are stories of ancient compasses that they used, right? So they knew how to navigate. That's what we call as Moors were navigators, right? We knew how to navigate. For us to come here now, it's either a matter of you have to have a reason, right? Because it is a long journey. So you can imagine any of us coming here, either we're coming here to settle, or we're coming here for trade because we know there's something in particular that we need to get from here. However, like you said, we were so caught up in the market thing, we didn't want anyone else to come here, or for whatever other reasons that we had to keep this part of the world kept only to certain people and keep certain people out, right? Okay, so further on in this book, there's a little thing that where it talks about Brazil, page 161, the same book. That the Phoenicians not only knew of the Americas but also regularly visited them is confirmed by an